Hi, welcome. I'm Mary Catherine. I'm a teacher here at Tranquil Space, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about pigeon pose. I wanted to share my favorite things about pigeon pose with you because pigeon is my all-time favorite pose in the world. Anyone who's been to my class probably knows that. I incorporate it in almost every flow, and in my own practice I always take pigeon. I believe that it's one of the best poses that you can do for your body in terms of the hips and opening up even deeper kind of muscles way down that you wouldn't even really think about in the hips, in the glutes. So really, really wonderful, wonderful pose. So today I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite variations on the pose, modifications, ways to work into it, and ways to incorporate this pose maybe in a new way in your home practice. I often tell students if they did one practice, as long as it's a healthy pose for you, as long as you don't have an injury that makes it not good for you, I think if you include any pose in your daily practice, it should be pigeon pose, in my mind. So definitely want to remind anyone that if you have any knee issues, if you have any hip issues, even some low back injuries or sacroiliac stuff, you might want to avoid this pose. So definitely something that you want to kind of test out, test the waters, and if it doesn't feel right for you, there's tons of other wonderful hip openers that you can do. If you do want to play with pigeon, I'm going to show you just kind of how to come into the basic version of this pose that we often practice here at Tranquil Space, and then show you a couple variations. So the way we typically come into pigeon pose is from down dog. Often a teacher will guide you to lift your leg up, behind you, bend the knee, opening the hip. And I personally like to get into the pose this way. And then you'll bring the shin forward between your hands. Or you can also put it right knee behind the right wrist. So when coming into this pose, the ideal version of the pose is to have that right shin or that top shin parallel to the top of the mat and the hips squared. Now that's pretty intense for me, pretty intense for a lot of us. So if that feels like a little too much, you can bring that heel a little closer to the hips. You want to make sure the hips are squared here and grounded, and that knee is jutting outside of the body towards the edge of your mat. So if you get into this version of the pose and you find that this hip is really lifted, you can use a block underneath that hip to give a little support. You can use a blanket. And I'll also show you some fun ways to use a bolster in this pose as well, right? But you want to make sure that that hip is grounded on something, on some sort of support. Once you find this kind of front leg shape, double check that back leg. Make sure it's pointing directly behind you like an arrow. So you want it to be projecting straight out of the back of the body. And then you can bring your fingertips to the floor, lift the heart here. And on an exhale, walk the hands out to fold. So some people will come just to forearms. Some people will stay on palms, totally fine, depending on how tight your hips are. Some people will walk all the way down, maybe even making a little pillow with the hands and resting the forehead on the floor. So any option there for you. You want to breathe here. So if you have the luxury of spending some time in this pose, you're taking 10 to 20 deep breaths and really getting into that hip. If you want to take it a little deeper, once you're down in that fold, you can work to take a little twist here. So the left arm weaves underneath that right shoulder. Right arm reaches behind the back, looking for that right big toe. And this can be really nice. You can release here, and it just gets a little bit deeper into that right kind of piriformis area, really into that right IT band hip area. So really, really yummy version of the pose. From here, if you want to take it into a little bit of a back bend, a little bit of a quad opener, many of you probably are familiar with dove. So for dove pose, you're going to bend into that back knee. The first stage is just right here, right? You can also use a strap around that back leg. If you want to take it deeper, you'll plant that right hand, reach back with the left hand for the foot. Again, a strap can be used here. Maybe work to just square off the shoulders, reaching back for that foot. Or maybe you can work to bring those toes into the crook of the elbow, finding a bit of a bind here, right? People who are extremely open may be able to even reach both hands back and grab that foot. Not accessible for me, but some of you may be able to do that. So those are a few fun options just from right here in your pigeon. Another way to make this pose a little more flowy is to find kind of a flowing vinyasa in your pigeon, right? A lot of teachers will teach this, inhaling to lift. Exhaling, you'll flow forward. So just staying on the tips of your fingers. Inhale, lifting up, kind of like a wave rolling here, and exhale, lowering down. So So finding this nice sort of flow is a great way to kind of undulate into the pose and kind of settle into it. Two more little options. One is sleeping pigeon, which is a nice fun kind of modification of the pose, or variation as well. You're going to come over onto that right hip. The left leg is going to come up, if possible, shin parallel to the mat. It's a lot easier in this shape. And that back leg is going to draw in just a little bit, finding a little space here. Then you're going to bring that right shoulder inside, if possible, inside to that right knee. Right hand grasps the heel. And from here, again, finding a little bit of space if you can to get that right shoulder nestled in behind the leg. And then left arm is going to reach up and over. So it's a bit of a side bend here, a bit of a side body opener. So again, just another kind of fun version of this pose to play with. We don't practice that one as much in classes, but it's really nice. For those who are looking for a little more of a restorative or even, I guess, kind of yin-like version of the pose, especially if you're real tight in the hips, I'm going to switch hips since mine's a little tired. You can also use your bolster here. So two ways to use a bolster to make this pose a little more comfortable. The first is just bringing that bolster underneath the torso. So it's kind of like a little bed. Right, you'll bring it up nice and close. You can bring it onto that foot or out in front of the leg. You're just going to slowly walk your hands out and bring your cheek to one side. So this can give you a little extra support and allow you to really relax into the pose if you want to spend a little more time here. For those who are a little tighter in the hips, or if you're coming into this pose when you're cold, so when you haven't done any vinyasas or any warming up before, a great way to kind of help stabilize the hips and give yourself a little more support is to bring that bolster underneath the hips. So in this situation, it comes under both hips, so you're getting support on both sides of the hip. You can bring that foot underneath the bolster if it feels a little too intense, or bring it outside. And same thing goes here, folding down. If you don't have bolsters at home, you can use pillows off of your couch or off of your bed. You can use blankets rolled up, so lots of ways to kind of make this pose really, really delicious without having all of these yoga props at home. So I think those are the main versions of this pose I wanted to show you, but again, it's a great place you can play. You can walk the hands over to the different sides, kind of creating a little more space. Two ways to come out of the pose. One, just coming over under one hip and extending both legs out in front of you. The other is, again, coming back through your downward facing dog by curling those back toes under and pressing up and back. So again, my favorite pose in the world. Definitely incorporate it into your home practice if you don't already. Definitely play with it in your body and see how it feels. Again, if it's a safe pose for you. And two last thoughts to remember. One, often when we're in pigeon pose, we clench our teeth, or we clench our shoulders, or we send the tension from the hip into a different part of the body. So really working to relax everything else and notice if you're sending that tension anywhere as you breathe in this pose. And the last thing, sometimes the hips can bring up emotions for us, so just kind of be ready for that. Many of us will do hip openers for years and never experience any kind of cathartic moment, but some of us will. So just kind of be ready for that and know that it's totally natural and totally normal when you get into those deep joints in the body. So thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.